United States federal government should impose firm-level carbon import fees. Advantage 1 is trade. Domestic political support for liberal free trade is dead. Trump is a symptom, not a cause. The only hope now is narrow trade deals that channel trade towards policy entirely. 25. Remove it about attempt at new economic public holds by partisan coalitions of history. Historically pro-trade Republican parties still elected Trump on the left during 2016. A major shift occurred trailer flip against the GDP. Both parties are part of neoliberal trade liberalization, new consistent trade tariffs, industrial policy promoting space focus on political message for votes of consensus, maybe entrenched competition from China combined with outsourcing their contributed but dramatic losses in manufacturing, its peak employment plummeted 35% losses and discontent triggered tidal shift in American global economy, helping Trump levied tariffs on thousands of imports, finding that these international trade system has broken the complete lack of appetite for rules-based trade derivatives with WTO and neoliberals would do well to consider promoting non-economic objectives through trade. There are no restraints on second-term Trump's trade restrictions. Bremer 310. Trump's trade policy represents the fundamental already included from his first term. Guano days when tariffs for levers agenda frames them tools revitalize manufacturing, replace tax revenue, negotiate tariffs away point. Sacrifices for objectives a likely impact on global economic architecture is consequential. We are witnessing transition from a rules-based system to public fragmentation, self-reliance. Trump supports durable unlike his first term, he faces no restrained voices as a lame duck points about legacy has a high tolerance for pain, politically and market impact. Trump represents the most significant challenge to the trading system since inception. The plan replaces Trump's tariffs with an affirmative vision for using tariffs to solve policy problems like climate change. Certainty is key. Mulholland and Williams 1218. Trump tariffs will not bring prosperity, working people parts of the environment and climate. They're not designed to critique based on prices unhelpful given need to use tariffs to reward decarbonization. Trump's arbitrary approaches and impediment to long-term investment. Need to rebuild manufacturing consistent policy into facilities investment given the significant upfront cost of facilities that predictability services as a disincentive to incentivize that. Different approach uses the tariffs to make the economy secure, workers prosperous, and the fight climate and sustainable tariffs. This should be assessed at the firm level. Tariff based on carbon intensity allow American workers to capitalize on carbon advantage. The U.S. needs a modern-based, value-based strategy. Progressives will be wise to craft a compelling affordable vision for trade based on needs of working people. That creates domestic political constituencies in support of targeted trade deals, specifically over AI supply chains and pharmaceuticals. Harold 24. Treating trade is necessary so longer. Winning few policies in the public seem convinced by trading with Russia. The U.S. was unable to start where Ukraine with the economy strong to do trade deals seem essential to prosperity. Policymakers and craft deals to tackle challenges. Tariffs will lead to transition to grid economies. Could address climate change. Governments could negotiate similar arrangements on AI, digital economy, pharma, and medical supply chains. The process political debate over trade will be transformed. The climate deal will not continue long debates between unions and multinationals. It will address support from activists for global climate coherence. So it appeals to allies and domestic voters for focusing trade on solving present challenges. Transition will be going to start with parties. What action China wants for a third of emissions from us means incentives. These could be negative. AI and digital economy offers another opportunity. Washington has strong interest in seeing it regulated harmonized fashion across emissions. Washington should use trade to persuade us to adopt digital standards. Other sectors may be right for deals. Pharma is an obvious priority. This allies have strong interest. Such strength supply trade resilience. So sectoral needs will demonstrably be to voters' benefits. Deals on specific sectors with the trade debate from the old unpredictable clash to agenda can be transformed by stakeholders, including environmental groups. Scalable trade, new constituencies for trade can be created, shoring up domestic support for wins the White House. Supply chain disruptions cause nuclear war. Martin 21. Supply chain disruptions impact national security, economic well-being, health, and infrastructure. Shortages drive aggressive behavior and international instability. Even economy depends on disruptions spill into adjacent sectors. Disruptions threaten nations' ability to find examples of raw materials and semiconductor teachers who got a war over shortages or to secure markets explicit in German and Japanese actions leading to World War II, even during Asian independence, such as in Europe prior to World War I. Pharmaceutical and medical supply chain resilience is key to pandemic preparedness. Plutonium 24. Infectious diseases diagnosis has grown rapidly. Climate change law just surviving new regions. These includes like Zika, malaria, coronavirus, severe health challenges are emerging. These necessitate international collaboration, resilient supply chains to ensure distribution of countermeasures. Resilient logistics are integral to surveillance of population, production, distribution, containing infectious disease before they escalate into pandemics. Natural and engineered pandemics are existential. Santos 130. We face worse pandemics are existential threats which could kill billions with doomsday clock moves. The closest to terrible test of 47 to people say pandemics lower risk than other existential threats. Majority of pandemics, I think otherwise natural outbreaks are becoming more prevalent, exacerbated by climate. H5 and 1 African birds could turn into full pandemic. AI could produce fire and true pathogen growth in scale, and COVID would lack a global agreement to manage biosecurity. AI governance averts existential risk. Kelly 24. Ever more capable models have been released that are face AI as too many AI exacerbate pandemic risk and biological visibility factors. Expertise existing models are sensory. These conditions are temporary. Only 5% of institutions these unacceptably high tools that exceed human intelligence to see if humans attack infrastructure leading to AI system service and risk is competence if goals are aligned. Imagine AI helps nations critical infrastructure to ransomware as talking today, ignoring the AI could be catastrophic, would be a worst mistake ever capable themselves to be development, creating feedback loop. There's expert consensus to make AI is probable. Articulating a consistent rationale for trade policy is key. Inconsistency is a market disaster. Harold 8-9. Thousands of companies open with no idea what they have tariffs to Trump's chaotic trade war. The official statement conflicting guidance markets hated the war. Presidents should be able to understand the economy and the struggle pen using statutes for clear objectives. Strategy the Trump needs negotiating strategy that isn't chaos. Canadian, New Mexican, European officials are open to collective action, but governments are less likely to cooperate with chaos and conflicting demands. Trump has a chance to correct course of reports instead of a disciplined lawful trade process. Trump establishing new global order. Advantage to his client. The U.S. has a significant carbon advantage over other major economies. Work at all 318. The U.S. is more carbon efficient than most current economy producer. The 2 to 5 times more carbon intensive. The U.S. will record 45% of emissions of the global economy. Differences are driven by energy efficiency. Electricity mix and industrial under U.S. production is high efficient due to high electrification. The electricity mix increases for renewables, nuclear, and hydropower shift from generation from coal to gas. The U.S. improved efficiency nearly 20% of the economies. We move policy. The EU has seen a solar shift from coal to oil, and Japan, Brazil, Russia, and India increase their rating. Chinese manufacturing has been fueled primarily by coal driving emissions. In 2023, coal made up 72% of our energy, reversing the trend, lower global emissions. American companies' decarbonization will continue. For instance, 22 U.S. companies represent growing conservative energy decarbonization. The U.S. has abundant natural resources. U.S. gas, displacing coal contributed 20% drop in emissions since 2005 and 2021. 80% nuclear capacity from renewables has contributed with the influx of investments through the IRA, Infrastructure Act, the IRA, and regional policies. But decarbonization is costly and collapses American competitiveness. A border tax on energy-intensive imports revitalizes American industry. Miko 23. A CBAM would limit carbon-intensive imports while improving competitiveness of domestically derived manufacturers. The U.S. and EU are subjected to more stringent regulations, emission goals, and competitiveness. Manufacturers are rewarded for lower carbon import. These rewards sustainable production and incentivizes decarbonization to stay competitive. Declining competitiveness causes extinction through deterrence. Failure Johnson 24. The U.S. is no longer capable of deterring aggression, promoting stability, again, nations have that. Lost in North Korea, whatever, counter to Taiwan, halt Russia's invasion prevention. Iran's actions against Israel. The U.S. stands silent to do as Bruce Brother comes to divide building nuclear deterrence. Is the industrial strength. The industrial strength is a backstop, makes negotiation sanctions and military status effective without industrial health efforts are hollow to halt decline. Policies must encourage industry. The plan protects domestic decarbonization from political backlash. Daha and Lee 1127. Progress on climate owes more to the IRA, ACU, CBAM than UN conferences. IRA facility $1 trillion to fight climate and trillions in investment. Even though Republicans control Congress is unlikely, it will pursue full repeal. It has been generating job benefits in the districts. Trump would realize clean energy strategy that is geopolitically and politically durable. The geopolitical crisis needs a strong defensible approach with such political tariffs. Protect investments and minimize carbon leakage as far as U.S. climate action changes political consensus. Climate change policy could provide progress. It drives domestic and global decarbonization work. 22. Climate change policy can target 25% global emissions at body districts and foreign producers up to climate emissions of all imports were as efficient as we at home. The climate emissions with 600 million tons of 20% country consumption emissions leaking climate injury are essential for decarbonization firms. Compete on carbon efficiency, drive for low carbon solutions domestically and firms gain competitive edge and have its financial incentive to become more carbon efficient. Only border adjustments prevent leakage. That's key to effective climate solutions. Shorter and stronger. 24. Governments have instead of revised carbon leakage and policy new empirical evidence suggests taxes do lead to leakage. Taxes reduce natural emissions consumption. Emission policy and implications are relevant to tax involve subsidies, other enrichment social policy impact global emissions only if accompanied by CBAMs. Climate change causes extinction through cascading complex system failure. Richards et al. 24. Emission rates above 3 degrees Celsius follow feedbacks accelerating accessible warning when may aging climate change pose an extra risk of unmined added to food research economic social political civil migration conflict on a global scale to save worst case scenarios unfavorable increase complexity increase of vulnerabilities interconnected landscape secret cascade failures create potential for collapse to rapidly spread across global scale food conflict occurring trash food security contribute to societal collapse due to institutional breakdowns. Climate change existential misguided threats not binary rates likely research conflict existential risk with events. Climate change not a single uniform process of diffuse impacts activating different risk cascades interactions with other security societal collapse volcanic eruptions and pathogens. These create different reinforcing global death spirals often plays your world direct impacts make earth uninhabitable. There are entirely different contractual ways underrepresented analysis or hard climate culture inside bleach drama policy claims. There's no doubt and created center for conservative science that builds consensus emergency results such as SAI contributes to systemic risk problems termination and climate change activism in this is a way of warming SAI plant the tail or worst case scenario solvency. The plan solves both advantages for level tariffs. Arcane will hold in 24 cents versus a child advantage for use low carbon tariffs for manufacturers ensure high standards in domestic market provide competitive for domestic produce tariffs already sold. Country origin there's no incentive for firm multi investing in lower costs incentivized to lower the long-term decarbonization tariff rates. Allow firms to differentiate based on how well they protect the environment. Decarbonized firms have business and aligned with a very sustainable economy where carbon borders to help exporters compete for not something different than price and restriction to enact a carbon border adjustment and staff and resource trade agencies including the attack and CPP investment in carbon accounting methodology. This will transform the tariffs into simply a small update to trade but implications are enormous. The U.S. has a huge leverage over partners. Trump can channel it towards desired outcomes without overplaying his hand. Herald 1219. Partners will decide whether to negotiate digging into the price of merger companies and money to hate the leverage of the American economy substantially outperform purely U.S. essential market countries with few alternatives to Trump given the Japanese market will manage nothing impairing governments to table countries reaching no deals will say Trump will need to reassure partners arguments are likely to hold. Firm level tariffs are easy to administer. Ramada 2-4. Product level emissions accounting similar to modern financial accounting which already enables companies to measure in real time product costs when companies pilot emissions accounting product emissions accounting for the killer for restoring manufacturing since emissions are accounting is similar to financial hundreds of thousands of training arbiters are already familiar with the methodology. The plan is Trump proof. Pipe 33. Trump can get behind the ideas that trade war take shape. The light charter supporting carbon system and admin speaking to trader circle the president is a climate skeptic but not ideologically a climate the lens of what is the U.S. competitiveness manufacturing. If that policy allows the U.S. to modernize carbon advantage changes the entire conversation. Federal actions key. Fabra 08 in seeking cooperative EU and California encounter constitutional barriers to sources and subject to explicit constitutional restrictions. Import export clause provides no state shall lay duties on imports and supplies to international trade.
Yeah.
Are you present?
No, I was just.
Oh, got it.
You all get courtesy.
Yeah.
Okay. Who does the plan?
The USFG. We don't think agent counterplans compete, but it's Congress.
Congress. Okay. Firm level tariffs. How are those calculated?
According to a firm's emissions.
What
So
does
like
that
if
mean?
a
Like
firm
who
emits a certain
calculates?
quantity.
According to
Who's
the carbon
responsible for
intensity
reporting?
according to the
Well,
carbon
I
intensity.
understand theoretically how you would find the carbon intensity of a firm. I'm asking who is tracking the emissions, how they're doing that, how it's reported, how the government knows how much each firm is
The
emitting.
Ramona evidence analogizes it to firm level financial accounting, which already exists in the status
Well,
quo.
okay, those are two radically different things because
Well, not
finances
really.
are
It
things
says
you
that-
can see
it
and
says that
track and
companies
people
are
pay money
easily-
for.
are like-
Emissions are invisible, so like what do you think? How do you think
Well,
companies
it's like
track
it's not like you count the like number of blue particles in the air or whatever, but it is like known by companies how emissions intensive their activity is, and the Ramana evidence, which is the
like you still haven't explained how.
they are developing technologies to determine how emissions intense their products are,
what
and the Ramana
technologies
evidence.
and what card
like,
says they'll be successful.
The
Also,
Ramana
I guess a
card
better
says
question,
this.
is it that the companies themselves tell the US how much they emitted?
There's a second part of this answer that's important. So the Mulholland evidence, I think, says that if companies do not report, the assumption would be conservative. The government and like border enforcement would assume that emissions are high, which creates an incentive for companies to do product reporting if their emissions are actually
that just seems like it creates an incentive for companies to lie. Like, is it just that farmers from other countries tell the US how much they're emitting and we believe them, or?
No, there is
Then
like.
How does the US
I think you're
enforce it?
assuming that like the EPA just asks for a number from firms. That is obviously wrong. Agencies they have methodologies and estimates for how much a certain
They have
activity creates
methodologies
emissions.
and estimates.
You don't think
Okay.
the EPA is just going to
new
false
question.
and asking like how
The
much
plan,
you
why
emit?
do you think the plan replaces Trump's current tariff regime?
It doesn't. It's just climate tariffs on top of current tariffs. But our argument
okay,
is that
I'm a
it
bit
changes
confused because-
approach towards tariffs because they are now
Well,
solution
so
oriented.
the tag of the Mulholland card is the plan replaces Trump's tariffs with an affirmative vision, so it's not that it replaces, it is just on top of existing tariffs.
It's not that the plan fiat's getting rid of them. That's a political argument about whether.
But you do think the plan results in getting rid of them? Or no?
No. It like
so
in
it's just on
political
top.
discourse
I
about.
guess, how do you
trade
think you
then.
solve the first advantage? Because all of your evidence says the current Trump regime is too punitive. The plan doesn't replace that. It just like does a carbon tariff and then hopes that other countries
Well,
trust
all of our
us now.
evidence
Why
about,
is
which
that?
is very recent about current tariffs, says that Trump is looking for a way to make them strategically purposeful because everyone is kind of just confused about why they're occurring. The plan provides a solution to that because it unites both climate and trade
The
constituencies.
plan just provides a solution for current tariffs, but that's fine. The warming advantage, why do you think that it solves warming? Like, why do you think other countries would change their practices based on a border carbon adjustment?
Because the U.S. is a significant portion of the economy, a border carbon adjustment.
Well,
which
but they would
mean
be
that there are
penalizing their
extra
own domestic
financial
industry. Like,
incentives.
why
No,
would
because
countries-
it would now be cheaper to export to the U.S.
10.
I don't think that makes sense. Okay, and then you could just move this one. Just like we did. Okay. Yeah.
943. I'm gonna select that too.
Yeah.
This system seems to work.
This seems to be working.
Yeah.
Okay. Sent it. It is going to be 8 trade climate. Okay, let me know when everyone has it and is good to go.
And then just a second.
Oh yeah, my word is, okay, now we're good. Panel, okay, Dartmouth, cool. Topicality, it means within 115, where the word means located within our side. The U.S. is the continental U.S. Wilson to see the business of the continental U.S. But next, for limits and ground, taking the question to base outside the U.S. makes it impossible to generate links to NDT, introduce entries, and limit the topic next up. States can implement fees facing relativism and should impose firm level carbon import fees, impose firm level carbon fees, refuse to comply with any preemptive contradictory federal orders to the above mandates, and refuse to comply with any federal initiatives unless the federal government imposes firm level carbon import fees. Applying for the course of the federal law is bills over uncarbon fails in the government safety, federal legislation, national policies, regular replicatory rights, numerous powers, and the social policy, first act, table, the pushback, and first conversation, and shape federal policy nullifications, all preemption, and sparks a cultural movement to rein in federal overreach to the most intent location, federal litigation, charging, controversy, American decisions, legal thinkers, urge them to monopoly, or violence, taxation, which is what happens in the issues restricted by national regime, government, and the states, federal overreach causes extinction, methyl 19, federal will get worse. Next up is the Brack Counterplan. This is Congress shall to arrange for the creation of independent bipartisan expert-based realignment commission, inclusion of the select commission with investment with the power to recommend a single energy policy proposal. Congress ought to let this Brack commission with the power to submit recommendations directly to Congress. Brack commission ought to recommend the SSF and ought to impose firm level carbon import fees solves and avoids politics as the rules 20 feet. The opposing companies proposals are low and the go work because that's a program to live and because of the serious being a public practice next off is the trade and justice should revoke presidential emergency authority to implement tariffs, solves the numbers that are country by the national emergency act emergency authority and industry uses the plan to lobby for continued Trump trade. Climate tariffs are particularly vulnerable to being abused and expanded for protections that this care and tariffs because of the attention of the ministry of the emergency by carbon intensity tariffs will destroy growth and maintain the scale of this global free for the conflict of the tariffs and maintain the purpose of the forecast of course previously we've seen tariffs goes to geopolitical goals of second time uncertainty among businesses Beijing fever growth ensures attack innovation and value line ensures intervention against all existential threats as Asperger's 20 clubs as we make technology methods citation is risky moves of moves that risk high level risk because humanity growth initially getting used as well to have people or for the people on the virtue things not very physical life as growth we can virtue the investment the activation that allows us to chances of survival and the way protection system turns the case louder and level 4 the retaliation transfer rather than supply chain after World War I country resort to economies over the offer for all the other James presence these options tariffs which I think that's a trigger a great rewarding shameful next off the icebreaker see yes should impose for a level carbon import fees except in Canada and Finland yes should impose a 50% tariff on all Canadian and Finnish goods. The US has estimated purchase on icebreaker from Canada now announcing a new tariff which relates to this 25 euros Las Vegas tariff by the under God out of Long Helsinki up to the icebreaker from city engineers with the top of the pursue trade with new icebreakers that we are behind this is Russia operates only China icebreakers almost on the table as we do officials made clear official permission for the first day for integrated supply chains icebreakers are key to challenge Russia and China in the Arctic and new Arctic cables like the 25 billion to the levels of Russia the North Ocean and the West Beijing with some of the activities in the Arctic capabilities and measures Russian air activities with the Chinese shows Chinese balance the Arctic level spaces carbon cables enable subs unchecked Russian Arctic presence incentivizes aggression causes great power war and cracks the cohesion of this country in Russia the text of this all major conflict China to access no resolution to major war Ukraine division resolution about the station of the Arctic preservation of the lost and maintain access to but actually be from the peace and the best option to Russia use for resources and to purchase a but the global situation cable neutralizing NATO independently failed to build new Arctic cables causes extinction as well to build 22 billion cable and Russian communications everything healthcare military logistical the world news Russian Arctic into the war as an existential threat next off the policy and access and tariffs imposed during the Trump administration and adopt a policy that not imposing any further tariffs. Debt ceiling will raise now narrowly voting default by Trump's VC. It's key this McCarthy for one because there's looking longer and through challenging the plan would ignite massive industry backlash which immediately flips all of Congress against this plan and 24th technical be fatal for any industries and industrial sectors that are too many industry stakeholders. Default kills readiness, extinction, the scar 22 US military operations, defense distributed for all where sales like invasion, military empowered possibly the effect loads within the military programs, they effect loads with the administration corruption, and empowering arbitrary actors escalate conflicts. Next off is the advantage campaign necessary.
Do that, yeah.
Advantage campaign necessary. Federal government should subsidize the manufacturing sector, inject 5.5 billion tons of diamond dust into the stratosphere every year. Applying one solves advantage one makes U.S. industry more competitive. Without a tariff, it also solves warming this very 18 theory of dust in the also warming this the RR by some sense of safety but also will ID grade it describes the properties services with plus neither this friendly warming the other rituals observe heat trade. The plan does not replace Trump's tariff that was crossing supply chains. Don't prevent war. This works way for the African war. The American government over the last years. How many people are to act opposite of individual participation options? It's just individuals. All the crisis is supposed to be collective of the 2016 trade problems. Peace. Whatever the president affected the 31 is a mixed effect and no evidence outlines hotspot. The only real scenario is semiconductors reshoring production to the U.S. solves that. Obviously, no term like impact globalization and cooperation are strong despite Trump. This sultry 24th. There's some factors. There's a tech back in the second new deals legalization. The sale of the national pressure come to Ukraine, but it goes to look people to come to one of those globalization the person consequence reality is more complex. No disease impact they can solve with populist will ban vaccines. The problem is political, not economic. No disease impact is bound to be medical and other recognition of pieces right rather the fact that the medical solve to feel vaccine to change our fate. No AI impact and they don't solve it. Their evidence is it could create an agreement about race to bottom and political incentives are relevant. No AI impact this more money when there's 80% potential AI as we can realize on the rise and be do not believe in the social where the comes project today have to go country but they found most of the sheets of also the potential consequences would be thoroughly tested. Climate of energy decarbonization now is enough to avoid extinction of the short term the energy the transportation of labor that also solve countries to investment because low structure champions of technology until we better say CVs and the possible all the emissions that send all the emissions government is essentially the most emissions is all figured out property is fast. US emissions are a drop in the bucket. There was any 19% with global emissions, but still rise. Border adjustments do not.
Read the Paula card. It's like warming last internet because you already read it.
Okay, sure. Warming allows for internet cable diversification. The impact was above. This Paul 24 the wrong guys. New modules with internet cables restriction with the low basic sector cables cables that everything your aviation chemicals in your was available like there's a pressure controversy no pressure because they both have the possible darkness warming was coming 4 times more faster than the world. No warming impact actually showing when okay, sure. BC which one which card? BCA solved nothing was about 25 BCAs are possible figure one best marginal and complex the implications of possible and the normal means solution turn it net negative. This was button 23 because there's no way to turn emissions to each audible will hide back 28 countries simple projects various technology fields a number of regimes they fix with different vehicle here consumption but they list lots of low very good usually because the every technical commerce with the materials and exclude complex abilities to be BCAs would encourage very things of what shifting production abroad and no warming impacts actually shown with analysis or global predictions. There are little evidence. That sure is marked at there is little evidence.
Okay, are you good?
Yep.
Okay, status is conditional?
Yes.
Okay, the icebreakers decide. So the second plank imposes 50% tariffs on Canadian and Finnish goods. Why does this not link to the net benefit?
Yeah, it's to prevent impact turns.
Yeah, it's the future.
Okay, got it. So all the planks kickable?
Yep.
Okay, and then obviously outside of the firm level carbon fees that we impose, Trump has already imposed tariffs. All your evidence is from February for this DA. Why do you think it's still unique?
The advantage counterplan plank on the other DA flow revokes presidential authority for tariffs, which would roll back Trump tariffs.
Okay, are the net benefits to the presidential authority one just the growth DA and the icebreakers DA, or also debt ceiling?
Just those.
Yeah.
Not debt ceiling.
Okay, icebreaker decide, the internal link is like icebreakers are essential for national security to contest Russia and China. This is existential. Why do you think that carbon tariffs are the thing that would prevent Canada from selling that to the US?
Our link evidence on this is like crazy phenomenal. It is like if Trump goes ahead with these kinds of tariffs, Canada and Finland will no longer trust the US or be willing to cooperate. It says, quote, asked what impacts tariffs might have on the icebreaker deal, Canadian officials made it clear measures harm virtually every facet of the relationship.
Yeah, I don't
including
think
those
you,
rely
that,
on
like,
integrating supply
I don't think the
chains.
words you just read imply that they would not sell icebreakers, like, oh, it harms the relationship, but also Russia and China are
Well, no, it says
confronting
parts
them
of the
in
relationship,
Arctic.
including
Seems-
those that integrate supply chains. The earlier part of the article indicates that's
Um,
icebreakers.
Like there's several lines about icebreakers. The
okay.
link card says when Trudeau traveled to Mar-a-Lago, icebreakers was on the table.
And then you only skip the guidance docs.
Yeah, and some miscellaneous cards on the
Right, yeah. Okay. The topicality argument. Is a consumption carbon tax topical?
If it's in the continental U.S.
What is in?
Within the geographical.
No, what is it in that sentence?
What do you mean? What is
When you
It
said
is
when
in the
it
U.S. The
is
plan
in the US.
jurisdictionally applies to the U.S.
Right, but
Yeah,
the
right.
things being consumed are not.
The things being
emissions
consumed are in the
produced
U.S.
or
but
The
made- well, no, the
decarbonization.
emissions must be made in the U.S.
must be produced in the U.S. So consumption carbon tax is not topical. Because that would tax
unless
consumption, not production.
unless it is consumption of emissions that are occurring in the U.S.
Okay.
So,
the
like-
emissions, the plan taxes
Okay.
happen outside.
And
the
then
emissions.
affirms, like, let's say fossil fuel, like they extract natural gas in outside of the U.S., but then they or let's say part of their processing supply chain stuff is they have activities outside the U.S. like processing their
So like if the
fossil
natural gas
fuels.
comes from abroad, no, you cannot tax that.
You
Okay,
can only tax
got it.
emissions that occur in the continental U.S. So if there's like part of the supply chain that's outside of the U.S.
Okay.
that part
Can
It's-
BAF include a BCA with
we
their
have
normal carbon
included
tax?
a BCA.
Well, no, I don't think so.
Probably not. Yeah.
Okay, state's counterplan is fiat uniform.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Can you tell me what happened, please?
Yeah.
Wall.
Are you on property?
Yep. Can I just look at those?
Sure.
All the slashes are just-
Sure.
Yes. $7.29. Trade, climate, T in the U.S. Let me count. Canada pick, states counterplan. My work's frozen. RAC, commission, counterplan. Aerosols, counterplan. Debt ceiling.
Trade.
DA. I will send that and then set up my stand, which I apologize for forgetting to do.
You can just use ours if you want.
It's just tall. Yes, it is.
Okay.
After you send it, Colin, I get it one more time.
Yeah. Trade advantage, climate advantage. T. Canada pick, or Canada and whatever the other one was. Norway? What?
Finland.
Okay. You know, one of the ones where they have blunt hair. Okay. Canada pick, states counterplan, commission counterplan, stratospheric aerosol counterplan, debt ceiling, trade DA. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Everybody's good? Cool. Trade advantage, want to say one, can say we don't replace Trump's tariff thumbs off 30 years, but we don't need to do it solve because it's about mobilizing political constituencies for future trade deals in the U.S. Want to see two, yes, supply chain setback our evidence cites World War I and World War II and says that historically national economic ripples cause conflict escalation. Want to see three, yes, hotspots our evidence says China and Russia, and the plan is reshoring, which means that if that is key to solve the plan solves it. Want to see four, yes, impact our argument is not trade high, but this thumbs and takes out their trade DA, but we need trade to solve particular issues and not issue-oriented trade deals. Want to see five, retaliation will be answered on the trade DA. Want to see six, yes, we solve the states the plan contains outbreaks before they get to countries with populous through medical supply chains. Want to see seven, yes, we get to developing countries. That is the point of trade deals. Want to see yes, extinction is our evidence cites the consensus of pandemic scientists. The next one will be worse, and it could be something like the avian flu, and climate change is making it worse. Want to see nine, a race at the bottom. Trade deals solve a race at the bottom through universalizing regulations. Want to see 10, trade deals are key to universalized testing. Safeguards. They run a bunch of arguments for us about why trade deals solve the downsides of AI, the climate advantage. What does he want? Decarbonization now is not enough. Other countries are massively increasing their carbon intensity, which is the carbon advantage card on the first card on the advantage, and doesn't assume leakage or lack of support for domestic decarbonization. Want to see two, U.S. Being small is our argument. Want to see three is the turn. One, some decarbonization is not well, that solves their turns because our ice in the Arctic will melt. Two, impact defense on the other page answers at three, and it's outweighed by our warming impact, which I'll do in a second. Want to see four, no consensus on BCAs. Our evidence cites experts says they solve leakage from industrial policies and subsidies, and says that is ongoing in the United States and is modeled on the EU CBAM, which is successful. Want to see seven, BCAs do solve for Ramana says that Ramana emissions accounting is easy, and the Mulholland evidence at the top of the advantage says the firms have an incentive to report in the CBP, and I have experience with imposing tariffs based on carbon intensity. Want to see the last thing, yes, warming impact one is a systematic stressor, even if we can cope with things like food shocks, migration crises, and the breakdown of governance. Individually, they collectively are an existential threat to affirmative scientists or conservative because they want to counteract fossil fuel propaganda, and also it is difficult to model future non-linear scenarios. Want to see three is termination shock, things like SAI, which is their counterplan. If they fail, which we will do, inevitably will cause rapid warming, and their evidence does not assume tipping points and feedback loops. T in the U.S. When we meet, the plan is for domestic decarbonization because it protects a host of other climate policies. That's four, ensures effects of accountability. Two, counter-trip decarbonization refers to reductions in carbon emissions. Good to 24 decarbonization policies for strategies for evaluating policy makers to mitigate climate change involved in reductions in quantities of carbon leads as a result of reduction of offsetting. Three, emissions in the United States includes consumption emissions, carbon independent, transiting territorial emissions, ignore reports of consumption emissions, including emissions and products of imported goods. The real declaration includes that states should avoid transfer of harmful activities, so they're reducing emissions by transferring manufacturing to another country. We nonsensical consumption emissions. Sorry, better measure of progress setting fossil fuel use. Groups advocating consumption emissions, while Thunberg and the Liberal Party for reliance, such as the community, has been unanimous. BCAs are topical since the open or postdoc, shifting the goalposts of the NDT is arbitrary and encourages the race to the bottom. Five, background BCAs are key to answer states, otherwise we didn't pick the United States resolution in the F, otherwise always loses the leakage. Six, F, innovation upstream carbon taxes only is still, it cannot produce our broad research and strategizing over the season. Seven, ground only trading apps meaningfully decarbonized energy mix TAs don't lead to leakage good apps, and not eight, functional limits energy mix TA and trade DA all lead to climate tariffs apps and random tariffs lose to carbon picks. Nine, no limits expansion consumption emissions means the app can only affect imports to the U.S. So global offsets, the carbon development mechanism, etc. are not topical. 10, NBS also this exposure most valid. 10, NBS is fine to say on issue with the price of emissions either via tax or capital trade. 11, reasonability having a high threshold for voting on T, committing interest cost T, cheap shots over substance. Canada pick. 1, do both exemptions to the plan are bad and justifies positional competition. The plan does not have to be universal, otherwise we always lose. 2, pick out of individual companies. 2, do the counterplan. 3, do the plan and plank. 2, to solve unionist issues. 4, insofar as it doesn't complete, it doesn't solve because every degree of forming matters, which is explained on the case. 5, Canada will sell icebreakers inevitably, even if it strains the relationship, or Trump inevitably strains the relationship outside of tariff. 6, no Russia impact breakup. 23, chance of Russia invading a national summit is 0 beyond crazy and comprehensible. Russia armed forces who died under Ukraine. Their competitors on no position, open a second for original 30,000, then face the Baltics 90%. And whatever Russia's 11th Army Corps side passing Leningrad has been destroyed. It would take years to reassemble. It is in no position to launch any type of military offensive. Finally, conditionality is a voting issue between C choice. We never invest the best counterplan is because they create no cost of night. We can only hear the alpha on other pages of that. Distance incentivizes end up counterplan research and clash on both sides, destroys education, dispo ensures to C choice. You can kick what we perm. This is not a DA because Trump tariffs thump if they don't get rid of them. The uniqueness counterplan answers on the other page will apply. States. 1, federal action is key. States constitutionally can't impose tariffs. That's Farber. 2, trade Fed is key to trade deals. Only federal action can impose spill over to negotiating deals in AI and medical supply chains. That's Harold. 3, state action causes leakage. Best empirical evidence confirms domestic action without tariffs just causes firms to move abroad. That's shorter. In Shaka, the cooperative federalism in place. 1, no spillover will not cause cohesion between red and blue states on other actions. 2, impact turn. Red states having power is bad. They will do things like ban abortions and be anti-democratic. 3, no impact. Laundry list is terrible and it's not outlined in a specific scenario. 4, the school solves California is resisting Trump now. 5, preempted by Congress because 17. Congressional preemption constitutes the greatest state preemption, state power preemption block state law. Looking at that effect, few of any state laws are removed from override state interests are ignored. Congress has little reason to subjugate a state without a true public. States can lobby, but no one to explain why the majority will listen when it sacrifices objective course of force. Not second guess consistently maintain state law, but simply must give way. The counterplan causes uncertainty because it results in a perpetual separation of powers fights between the states and Trump, which tariff certainty is key to solve all of our impacts, which will be on the process counterplans. What's up? Do the counterplan, then the plan should is not immediate, justifies the delay counterplans, but that shields the net benefit. Rack counterplan or commission. 1, links to politics and their link evidence proves Congress says no to the counterplan. Robin 23 practices doing backwards because all players agree action impose also no few individual decisions are unrelated to cross-governing decisions by Congress. There's no agreement with interest such as climate policy. 2, Trump says no, the counterplan doesn't beyond him, he can ignore the commission. 3, it's uncertain looks subject to political commission, reversal and delegation of trade authority. Certain stable trade policy is key to cross-border investment and trade flows and solves those advantages. That's Harold and Mulhall. 5, do the plan through the counterplan's process. It's not fiat equating, just that Congress does not object to the plan, at which point it will have been adopted. 6, do the counterplan then adopt the plan's carbon tariffs, not intrinsic because as the timeline of the counterplan's process is not separate because it mandates the plan. 8, do the counterplan that complete option certainty and immediacy or illegitimate. They divorce, debate from the literature and make it anti-educational. You should know it when you see it. SAI counterplan. Did that have any corona benefits? No, wait. Okay.
Do both.
Oh, sorry. Last thing on BRAC, do both. Okay, SAI. 1, do both. 2, does not solve the trade advantage. Obviously, 3, manufacturing subsidies don't solve leakage. Is inevitable and ongoing, and subsidies are ineffective. 4, doesn't solve ocean acidification, extinction of merchant. 15, biggest extinction in history, which provides acidification of oceans. The new study concludes 90% of species level of the rate carbon was released similar to emissions overwhelming ocean absorb carbon. That's really cataclysmic acidification of matter, marine life is grave. Danger breaching core killing sales that worse instead of the acidification threat extinction. 5, termination shock that was explained on the case. 6, SAI causes extinction and triggers every existential risk. Again, 21. Transfer girls, all flex, ecology, culture, girl, electrical threats, nuclear warfare, systemic risk studies, highly catastrophic outcomes, changes to weather, effect, vegetation, plant communities, transform structure, under SAI impacts, ecological systems with economic systems, dangerous ecological terrorists, resolve those in depletion, maritime points, national political dynamics, ideological infrastructure, lock them in, follow historical analogs, market historical analogs, debt ceiling. 1, no link. Their tariff slate card is about the UK Prime Minister's perception of tariff. 2, Trump tariff stuff that pisses people off, reversing it. 2, reversing the tariffs doesn't solve if their link is true because it will make Republicans and Democrats dig in against Trump. 3, no, there's no consensual deal outlines in the parliamentary could blow up anything. Does it 0? 4, 2. Republicans are willing to deny Trump's agenda, putting out making decisions. Republicans haven't agreed to the number of standing cups to the two sides, social ability tomorrow. Second, there were disagreements on Medicaid to the because a single he had a parliamentary ruling on the basis of the satisfy tax cuts big. Overseeing come back to home, through this now there is no races takes higher for the next complicated phase of the parliamentary tells Republicans they can't use the uncertain test scoring tactic. It would be a disaster. They have provided extra savings and truly an enviable position for. Unionist cards about reconciliation do apply because there are 10 Democrats will vote for the Republican debt ceiling bill. 5, Trump world is completely incompetent. His PC fails. Harris 1223. The question is whether he will get anything done as the next side of Senate members of the coalition cracking weeks before they even sworn in. Trump is not as short as national Senate in 6. Wasting PC on absurd trust the idea that Trump would come to the battle ready Sabbath one head into reality. Mega have no earthly idea how to be powered as then arbitrary hour for must be needs brewing. 6, the plan 6. No link that is satisfied intrinsic logical policymaker can do both. 7, fights for cover better lives program. 18, midterm all Congress approved aviation policy measures to abuse bipartisan water and infrastructure by McConnell. Bipartisanship even as senators fought over Kavanaugh, marked fought over Kavanaugh. 8, debts will inevitably bill Republicans out of the debt ceiling. 9, no impact is disproven by every debt ceiling fight in history. Trade is that. Uniqueness counterplan will also answer the uniqueness counterplans on other pages. 1. Do both. Single. Structurally applies the market overwhelms the signal of the plan. 2. Counterplans full of office. The worst of all worlds on health. 3. 31. The problem is not terrorist. The problem is trouble. Aristocratic separations. Terrorist made it impossible to invest. We don't have pronouncements about 2107 flow walls within the same day. Reversals, business, need predictability, and stability. No company can build when trade changes minute by minute. 3. That means it doesn't solve the trade advantage. 4. It also are evidence that the Trump is a symptom of a cause of a rising anti-globalization movement in the United States, which means they can't solve uniqueness for their trade. DA 5. Damage is already done. Remus 327. No matter what returns, the damage has been done. Sentiment is soaring and souring trade. Partners preparations where the Trump is a business fail. Shaking ground new daily change to show it as anyone's guess. Now, dissent proper. 1. Liberal trade is dead. Trump tariffs are understated to represent the new Washington consensus around tariffs and industrial policy, which is bipartisan dispense multiple administration. That's Bremer and Hartley. 2. Only greening trade prevents long-term collapse of trade and bills to investing constituencies around trade that solves problems the public currently sees trade as a source of job loss and deindustrialization only. That's Harold 3. No backlash to its economic strength makes the U.S. market vital, so they can't backlash to the plan. That's Harold 4. The plan averts an impending trade war from Trump. That's Walker 212. Trump's tariffs are costing Chinese response to trade war. The winner, there's a difference between across board and target of tariffs. U.S. tariffs, China carbon contract would create a risk to the top of climate, leading to a virtuous cycle of lower prices and emissions. Such tariffs could be welfare enhancing. Current tariffs are across the board. Go back to politics. I'm going to figure out a finished program in the state breath while we're going by this doesn't never go over major issue for joint minor major bipartisan accords on others. That card is remarked it bipartisan accords on others.
Okay. One second.
Okay.
Oh,
Or do you need to- Oh, okay, then yes, we will take a second.
Yeah.
Okay. 10 seconds, please.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
Okay. Any reasons to reject the team besides conditionality?
No.
Okay.
Counterplans that can beat uncertainty. And
Sure, whatever. The Icebreakers DA piece of impact defense you've read says the Russian army is depleted because they're like out of troops and tanks. What part of this do you think applies to the Navy?
What part applies to the Navy? It's about the Russian military.
Not really. It's
but
like
our
pretty
impact
specific.
scenario is about like the Russian Navy going into
Like
the Arctic.
Russia
Well,
is
I
not using
understand
boats
that,
in
but-
Ukraine. It is landlocked.
Well,
well, not landlocked, but like it's not a
well, okay.
not really a naval fight going on there.
Well, it's like, you are correct that they are fighting with their army in Ukraine, but that card is both about Putin's political will to open another front and the fact that hundreds of thousands of Russian civilians have died, so people don't
It's
want
about
to
the
join the
Baltics.
army anymore.
Okay.
Wait, also, like, your internal to escalating to major broader war requires obviously engaging with NATO, which requires a land war. Russia obviously isn't
Not
going to only
really.
use its navy to
Right,
overpower
okay.
NATO.
Sure. I want to talk about
You think
so
your
the-
impact is just the boats nuke the other boats?
No,
That
it's-
seems not right.
No. Okay, whatever. Trade advantage. So, the assertion that the plan creates a constituency for trade.
Yes.
How does it overcome the opposition of like GOP senators?
It's not about like the plan. Well, I did say the plan is bipartisan on politics, but wait, actually no, I didn't. Sorry. The argument for the plan revitalizes trade is not about it is popular with the government right now. It expands the political trade debate beyond unions that are anti-trade and multinational corporations that are pro-globalization. It breaks that debate into, or adds additional constituencies. This Herald card in the one I see is really long and really it's very good. It says that the plan would add in people on both sides of the aisle who care about climate change to the trade debate and make them pro-trade deals.
like,
And then
add
it
in
says
people-
that expands domestic political constituencies
so
and revitalizes political support for
Seems
trade.
like this is dependent on like pro-trade people getting elected.
Well, not really. It's like
Well, you
the
said
plan.
it adds people in to the both sides of the aisle who are pro-trade. How else could that happen other than like
Okay, I guess so, but like
is your argument
the way that
like,
you
the
get
union
pro-trade
become
people,
pro-trade and then
the way that you get pro-trade politicians elected is that you make that mass swaths of voters in the United States pro-trade.
okay,
and
but like
pro-negotiating new trade deals.
that is many years from now. How do you solve any of your link turns?
How do we solve our link turns? Because your impact is just about economic growth in the long term. We think that any short-term shock link is thumped by Trump's tariffs, and so it is try or die to revitalize trade. Because your link argument is just trade is good because it is efficient and helps
Okay.
promote industrialization in the U.S.
Did you say, you just said perm do both for the like trade uniqueness counterplan, right?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or like I made other arguments, but that was the only
No,
one.
but like permutation wise, that was.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Sure.
have some scribbles in my foot.
Yeah. The BRAC counterplan. You said counterplan is normal means, and also Trump says no? Question mark.
Well, the plan fiats that Trump doesn't
Well, if
complies.
normal means
because
is-
it says USFG.
Okay. Whatever.
937.
Yeah.
5:30 you said?
Yeah. Are people good for an order? Okay, it's the trade DA. The advantage counterplan, the one that does diamond dust. The state's counterplan. The trade advantage. And then the warming advantage. Did everyone get it?
Yes, sorry, you said trade, SAI, states, trade, climate?
Yes. Okay, everyone is good. Awesome. The plan says that definitely global trade continued that collapses the economic growth globally that outweighs what is time frame short term, which matters because you only have one split in all 21 even other exchange series, long shifts, and to the industry, versus just a little bit of the calculation for S with necessity by race, 23 online movement studies and low shifts. Each two is magnitude when climate scientists refer to it as existential. They're not using the way that impact analysts do. The clear climate change extra comes over fringe activists, not scientific models of IPCC, Hubble, and Tunichi, there are little evidence for research. Extra climate change issues are the suggestion because scientific media public as we should on experts clients. As such, analysis of our industrial nuclear war, innovation, rebel, the Spanish flu war would not qualify neither experts nor the cases introduced the IPCC reports, extra Julie FCC, referring to reversal maximum communities, not infinity as a whole. They were curious research to do principles that IPCC are absolute. Resides to all the Alzon have over millennium, common activists makes each relating different products of the industry purposes. The need to fundamental change to show its ability than GCR, but deeper scientific and similar to or found 1,000 variation of change to this one. Where quantity investments and probability the times of larger consequences are spatially constrained to that's not media. But what unfolding for centuries, 3 existential risks they conceded economic strength is the bedrock of solving all existential risks, which the Ashford evidence dropped by the TVC. It also turns the industry internal link by wrecking American sectors. Goldberg and 18 their book report inverts of aluminum and steel, results of global distinct the move sensitive aggressive metals of the global climate change against the responsibility cost for domestic and shield and puts American contribution. Here's like domestic getting double losses or Delaware that's like going through the energy bins still over. Green complications for oil and gas pipelines. It turns warming, tariffs, increased emissions, leading to 24 carbon residues. Imports of innovative products of the dairy material use rate is production, which is like more emissions per hour. Supply chain moves further forward direction. It crushes innovation and clean tech for a month. Spending 24 plus. We guys can get back much freedom with a book of the markets, to produce markets, people use for research, people are practical. Flourishment of the environment is industrial image based on a certain point income leads to environmental improvements, mark at improvements, economic collapse independently turns warming, it wrecks investment, and drives people to dirty tech with stuff and ultimately for an element. More streams focus on jobs and prices rather than the environment reduction and income converted with the green products. Cheap products are not sustainable now. The counterplan solves uniqueness issues. It has the federal government revoke presidential emergency authority to implement tariffs. No TVC cards since it's insufficient to roll back Trump's tariffs now. Permutation do both links to that benefit because it includes the plan's border carbon tariff. A flip flop is not bad. It's not too late for you to cover and 435 from tariffs for representatives. The broader machine that is in love with voting under tariffs against the lawmakers or recommendations from several desire to tariffs abilities will be posted once there's going to be economic carbon costs. We'll do that this week. I've got to U-turn from straight back to tariff authorities. Countries are open to reversal. Marks and 4 3 for liquid basement. Or the world reaction shock as whether you're going to give for the US final convention negotiations fail British Prime Minister. So they feel like combining research not the boards which information will continue positive discussions. Mark at discussions, all of which takes out the case. It guarantees that if true, there is no chance the plan results in a constituency for trade or gets other countries on board. The interlink is the plan gets other countries to see it. Trade tariffs is having a purpose, which doesn't happen. Now the green trade turn is wrong. Tariffs are the death knell. It's forced moves and retaliatory measures from key allies, reorder supply chains, and erases US market share. Quote, totally destroyed the multilateral trade regime. It erases over 60% of global trade to Kitchen in 24. The trade investigated the effects of the trade investigate retaliation occurring in trade war. This trade war has been a 64% decline in the volume of world trade. It's way better than TVC card. Countries don't care that our products are green. They care that they're having to pay a bunch more at the border, which is proven empirically over time. The advantage counterplan. The TVC absolutely goofed it. 0 cards about diamond dust is GG's. The counterplan solves the warming advantage. It might sound crazy, but sprinkling diamond dust in the atmosphere every year can cool the planet by nearly 2 degrees. Uses both below danger thresholds and buys us time to innovate our way out of the current trajectory that's parasiting scientific studies conducted by NASA and the Swiss Institute of Technology. It no links all their traditional objections to atmospheric injection because diamond dust is reflective and does not clump together, which means it will actually reflect heat instead of absorbing it, which is what all their cards in guiding SAI are talking about. It's comparatively more likely to solve on the planet because it's sufficient on our own. They require companies and consumers change behavior and other countries change their emissions practices, whereas the counterplan is a quick tech fix. The counterplan alone is more pragmatic because it's a one-check technology. Permutation to both links to that benefit because it includes the plan plan, the counterplan solves the ocean acidification stuff because it draws carbon out of the atmosphere, or the plan doesn't. This card was just an impact, just explained why the plan with uniquely solve ocean acidification more. The termination shock is wrong. It doesn't apply to diamond dust, which was above. Also doesn't apply. The counterplan uniquely avoids it because the one card that's not part of clumping, also above. Termination shock is also solved by permanently fiating, that we do it annually without stopping, which means that we would never have a termination shock. The state's counterplan. I'm only extending the part of the counterplan that has the states do the plan and buck preemption. Concede that the counterplan gets preempted. That is good. The counterplan fiats through that. They did not read an impact about that being bad to do, which means someone here does not get one. The only thing they read is that red states will ban abortion, which is the status quo and is outweighed by our impact. It solves the entire case, and if all 50 states jointly and uniformly adopt the plan, which is sufficient for everyone, is the internal link, and it's more likely to solve because it creates the political incentive for downstream adjustment of a CBAN. Bucking preemption is a short-term benefit to that because it has the states tell the government to fuck off, and then still results in solving the plan anyways. That outweighs the net benefit. Is the benefit is bureaucratic overreach. It outweighs the political backlash to totalizing ammunition of previous society that was dropped by the 2AC, culminates in revolution and civil war, which is more likely due to democratization of commercial taxation. In 24, I also have everyone accidentally WP models of these never need quick about weapons or help or negative science, ambitious to manufacture weapons, chat ones about science, including enough info about biology, chemistry to manufacture weapons. Need laboratory equipment that's increasingly not a barrier. It turns climate change within N25 Trump. Promotes more climate action under California's anti-government has harassed California and independence, and it turns the trade advantage, which is above certainty. There's no impact to it. The counterplan is super certain. It has all 50 states jointly and uniformly do the plan that gets upheld in court, which means that everyone knows that the plan has been enforced. They did not say that they didn't have a deficit to that. No impact connects to certainty. Plus, Trump doing the act would be absolutely crazy. So there's no way that the counterplan is any less uncertain than the plan. Permutation do the counterplan, then the plan doesn't solve because it doesn't have states contravening federal law. It would be seen as the federal overreaching, which zeroes the net benefit. Plus, it's intrinsic. It adds an element of delay that's not present in the plan or counterplan. The counterplan does not compete off time frame. So their theoretical justification does not apply to the trade advantage. They don't solve the trade advantage. All of their evidence assumes replacing Trump's current tariff regime with a new carbon tariff. The plan does not do that. It means it cannot possibly revitalize the trade regime in the U.S. or restore trust in anything. The administration will implement the plan and result in tariffs overzealously by simplifying calculations, ignoring data, and exaggerating, which magnifies our link to the DA. If you don't work, tariffs. Why does it from the most trade business more than include tariffs for specific products and just taking account other trade barriers or tariffs? How innovation will run on nuance, USSR acknowledge the difficulty in calculating rates based on detailed analysis of each country. The measures also backward-looking and does take into account preemptive efforts to balance trade. Having that was brought to before customs duties had set the country got cloud food representatives looking for lists to get highly diverse rules. Risk of upsetting global trade that zeroes every scenario. The only thing the 2AC said was that their formula isn't specific, but they cannot answer for you in CX how it gets calculated, who is in charge of those calculations, why the U.S. government would be able to trust companies or listen to them, especially given the fact that the Trump administration just doesn't trust other countries in the first place. There is also no reason the plan creates a precedent to improve AI supply chains or pharma. Their evidence says that inconsistency is a disaster, which Trump thumps massively because he makes other countries feel like they can't trust U.S. actions, and imposing more tariffs obviously gets perceived by other countries as Trump going rogue. Is the orange tariff ban, which means there's obviously no follow-on. It's not key to supply chains. Their Martin impact card is about COVID. It's describing the status quo, which means that COVID thumps the impact. They also don't have a means to solve it because other countries won't cooperate, which is above. That also takes out the pharma scenario because their interlink to it is about supply chains. Independently, the plan doesn't solve disease. The 2AC response was just, quote, they solve through medical supply chains. They did not get more words in the 1AR. The 1NC said that populace leaders globally will ban vaccines, which means even if they improve supply chains, it doesn't matter because no government is going to give them out to citizens, which zeroes the disease internal link, no takebacks. Obviously, it's not key to AI. Tons of all causes like global regulations now, which means that AI is inevitably solved, and there's no risk of AI of emerging AI because of technical limitations. Plus, it causes race in the bottom and political incentives and other countries. Warming advantage. Concede some amount of warming is inevitable. It takes out the turn, means it's not offense, but it solves the affirmative because it means that there's already progress with decarbonization now, so there's only a risk that the plan makes that worse by tariffing a bunch of countries into the ground such that they no longer have the capacity to decarbonize because they can't afford to. They do not solve when it's wildly insufficient, at which point the diamond dust counterplan, which scientists agree is a try, is enough to be a try or die 2AR. Now, BCAs, they are a disaster. One, consensus of models, and scientists prove they mitigate less than 1/3 of the leakage produced by a domestic carbon tax. Best considers additional 2% reduction. That's the white spec evidence. 2 is complexity. It's possible to track the origin, production process, and intensity of every good factor of production. Also, wise fact that matters because it means that other countries and companies won't have an incentive to reduce emissions, means they can't solve warming or leakage. 3 is circumvention, substitution, and transshipment make it 0. That's wise fact producers will gain a system coaster and all 21 public secret opportunities gain a system. Produce the arbitrary years of hours to search for return to go with pay integrated energy just investigating CVM. What can I see that innovation? The modeling stuff doesn't make sense. Their best card on this is Romana, which now just is to finance it. That's very different. Companies have to keep track of finances because that's how they stay in business. They can easily lie about emissions and they have no mechanism for enforcement. They don't have an internal link to the manufacturing scenario. Tariffs harm it. Red Trick and doing that video, principal types will handle any defect manufacturers and development inputs away from the profits. There's no guarantee they will do more about manufacturers, obligation corporations. Choose to distribute business to manage shareholder setup is increasing productive capacity, and there's no impact. We want to be forced to play a small role in defense. National security argument is based on false and misleading expectations putting on its spot. Less than 1% of the industry output plans to produce defense grade armor have been the recipients of subsidies. Rest this industry has not been most of the worst history of the complex. There's very little that still must be dependent on subsidies, tariffs, and protection measures. Our political contrivance is not about national security.
Okay, you good?
Yep.
What do you think is your best card on the economy is not currently cooked?
The uniqueness counterplan rolls back Trump tariffs, which is the only variant that any card gives.
Right. What do you think is your best card on that solves? Or like that restores confidence in the market, that's perceived as
Yeah,
credible?
the 1NC card is pretty good. The copper
Sorry,
card.
the 1NC card you read on which page? There were a lot of uniqueness kind of ones going around.
Yeah, I think that should have been on the trade page.
Uh,
Yeah, the Erickson card.
Okay,
But also
this card does not even a little bit say that it would not, that it would reverse effects on the economy. It just
Also
says there
the
is a National
copper-
Emergencies Act.
the
Okay,
copper
Kapoor
card and
cites
the
Tim
Morris card is
Kaine,
also good.
who is like noted Hillary's VP, and then cites Representative Bacon. It does not cite anyone who is working anywhere in the economy or say anything about consumer or business confidence. Would you like to
I don't
present
think
me
the
with a better warrant?
2AC had a card on
I read
it.
two
Might be
cards about
structurally
this.
fucked now, but the warrants were all Trump tariffs, which the counterplan rules
Yes,
out.
and then I read two cards on it. Flip-flopping is bad and damage is already done. And I'm slow,
Okay,
so when I
well,
read cards,
so-
it's kind of a big deal.
So two things. One is the plan is like also a flip flop, so I don't think that the app uniquely solves this.
Right,
It's
I'm asking you
true
about
that links
uniqueness
to
for
the
your
DA harder.
DA.
Right, but it means if you're right that flip flopping is bad, then like plan links to the DA is certainly harder.
Right, but your
But
DA needs
second
uniqueness.
though,
Mhm.
is that the Marx card is quoting global
Okay,
leaders
Marx is like
broadly
global
and says,
leaders aren't crashing out. That is not economic leaders are not and feeling the impact of the tariffs. Are you like aware of how
economic leaders
poorly
don't
the
matter
S&P
for
is
the
doing?
DA because the
But the
people that
DA
would be,
impact
but
is
no,
credible.
this is important. The people
Yeah.
that would be placing retaliatory tariffs are world leaders
Right, but your
in
impact
other
is about the
countries, not
US
economists.
economy.
Right, but the internal link to that is that other countries slap on a bunch of tariffs. So it doesn't matter if economists care.
No,
What
it
matters is
isn't. Like,
do
okay.
other countries slap on a bunch of tariffs in response?
Is it relevant for your growth impact if the stock market goes down by like 10% in a day? Or no, we don't care about that.
Yes, it's relevant, but importantly, our impact is that economic growth gradually reduces X risk. So even if when the economy is low now, making it lower definitely is a marginal increase in overall existential risk. It's a structural impact.
That seems a little silly, but sure, fair enough.
You drop the Ashenberger card, which has all of this in it.
Like, okay.
When we read cards, it also matters.
Sure, fine. Okay. The advantage counterplan, you did not extend subsidized manufacturing,
No.
correct? Okay.
Just
The
like this.
states counterplan?
Yep.
Do the counterplan then the plan? Why does that not create a conflict between the states and the Fed?
Well, we would first say like reject that theoretically.
Yeah, I
as
get
a
that.
permutation.
But you made a substantive
Yeah,
argument.
but it
about
also
doesn't
doesn't
solve
solve because it's looked as the federal government responding to the states by like intervening. Instead, the states need to like buck preemption.
No, it looks like the Fed responding to the states bucking preemption by being like, okay, when you buck preemption, we will do the thing you want. Why does that not solve your
We can
benefit?
debate that out, but also like we
Okay, so
definitely
let's
don't
debate
get
it
this
out. So why doesn't
permutation.
that solve?
You do not get this permutation
Okay,
because of delay.
Okay, 729.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Yeah, I have all everything. Sure, yeah. Yeah, I love plenty of time.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, you did read this? No impact to manufacturing code, right?
What? I don't know. Just like whatever you call it.
I'm gonna just use pumpkin, yeah. Yeah, I love it. I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
542. Alright.
These guys do.
Seems good to do.
Okay, BRAC Counterplan, Politics DA, then the Icebreakers DA / pick out of our friends up north. Is this the right? Yeah, that's the right one.
You said BRAC, that's who in Canada.
Yeah. Okay, everyone good to go?
No, my dog is still opening.
Yeah, same for me.
What the fuck is a monadic noun? I'm excited to find out.
Okay, I should probably explain that. Thank you,
Yeah,
Lynn.
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, everyone good? Okay. Cool, Dartmouth, you'll do. BRAC Counterplan not going for reject the argument of the team in theory, conceding cross-play reasonability, but your theory argument also doesn't apply because the TBC said certain team immediacy counterplans are bad, which is not the counterplan, is pick out of adopt. Now the DA, go there now, not going for concede, quote, no impact and pass fights to prove the impact. We're going for other uniqueness counterplans, so this doesn't really matter. The Icebreakers DA. The pick solves 100% of the case. There is no reason the tariffs on Finland and Canada are key because they're tiny trading partners. Due permutation to both links that because it includes tariffs on Canada, permutation to the counterbalance severs. We're not competing on normal means or positional competition, so their theory argument doesn't apply. Fees in the plan text is a bare plural. It's not accompanied by specifying article like a or the, which means it's general and cannot be subset in circus 17 to about the contradiction expressed in locations there is property to the constitution analysis of phrase is taken to be the notes of kind, but independently of the plan, the resolution made us that the plan cannot be subset in market instrument or economy wide or economy wide scope. This term clean energy policy requires broad systemic change. This key to limits the ground speculating and the energy policy substances require into nuclear level across change across the substances across a range of policy issues. Regarding policy issues, decarbonization requires economy wide applications. Decarbonization also carbon energy. Decarbonization all aspects of the economy plans change transport buildings those all be transformed if they meet a vote ag, one lowest stage development hundreds of specific subsets like aviation, ag, defense, or rail, and 2 grand economy wide changes ensure links to core generics like econ politics force the structurally change the energy and moving enough links to DAs. The permutation to the plan and playing 2 links, but we're kicking the second leg because they didn't impact on the DA and didn't impact on the DA. The kind of plan clearly solves warming. Canada and Finland are tiny in the global economy, and their argument is about cultural spillovers and broadly affecting behavior in the global economy, which the kind of would still clearly cause the tiny amount of warming produced by Canadian and Finland imports is clearly not key. This is clearly not sufficient to cause extinction. Now the DA proper Arctic presence prevents nuclear war. Russia presence solves the presence of surface fire, which deters Russia from taking Svalbard if they take it. Escalate to NATO response or cracks NATO cohesion this weather and also turns warming. There will not be cooperation and supply chains in the world where the US and Russia are shooting to each other. It turns the case faster than they can solve it because their internal links are off. Because they rely on things like new elections in the Senate, which will not happen for years. Now the line by line is wrong. Trump inevitably strains the relationship was an assertion in the 2EC, and the argument that we will sell icebreakers inevitably is also an assertion. The 1NC evidence is phenomenal. It's not just about relations more broadly. How the 1NC evidence says this is the biggest transaction we're pursuing with Canada and Finland right now, so they see it as a linked issue to the tariffs. Our evidence is so specific and not generic to relations, so none of this actually applies. I'm going to read the relevant lines from the 1NC link evidence. Says, quote, icebreakers were on the table. Asked what impacts tariffs might have on the icebreaker deal. Canadian officials made it clear. Measures harm virtually every facet of the relationship, including those that rely on tightly integrated supply chains. There's no number. The 2EC argument that the relationship will broadly collapse the deal is an assertion. The 1NC uniqueness evidence says that Canada broadly want the candidate wants to sell icebreakers because it's key to their domestic industry, but that if they're tariffing us, but if we're tariffing them, they can use it as a carrot and stick mechanism to ensure compliance and to try and bash the U.S. into reducing tariffs, which means that there's still a huge risk of the way Canadian relations are at an axis point. They're strained now, but not irrecoverable. It's expiring in 25. If this will ever have with the relations is based on the US or the national solution on our tweets, there's a declaration within the book and relationship this transaction over the Democratic Party or Republican Party, and this is community is going to have the next reason what happens there is tariffs or pressure on relationship because it's going to have very differently. And Trump's comments will not take the relationship, only tariffs can discuss all about 25 aspects of the agreement can remain steadfast. And obviously the unique Counterplan solves the reasons the relationship is tanking the quo because it's a sign of goodwill. And it's a sign we're willing to work with Canada. We're willing to work with Canada and Finland. The impact defense is not responsive. The 2AC card is solely about the army. It's about the Baltics and Sister. Russia would not be able to invade it. Russia would not be able to invade it. It's not about the Navy. No new one air impact defense because otherwise the 2AC can assert every part of the DA is wrong and then read new answers because it's technically an extrapolation of what the 2AC said. Here's a card that says the boats will shoot nukes to each other's household in 23. Groups of scholars at the NDT looking at planning extras with experts local question with presidents reviews the Arctic in 2035. So that the US manufacturer whether Russian sanctions against Russia launch and vessel and gas trade Russia. I compare the Arctic institution with the solution of Russia against Paris from the West Ukraine. Russia conquers Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus, Russia, and Gulf of Russia controls and salary and Russia discussing. In the Arctic, it poses a very strong connection to the Arctic expansion of Solar along the MSR, the Native Survivor of Russia, holding Article 5 of the Native Members, would focus more on pressing issues from the American members, also members of any cross motivation. Sweden, Finland, faces the integration and taxing and the US would rearm across the Arctic. Only US Russia war causes extinction. This far across the US nuclear war between US Russia and the US Russia to be possible to only possible the US Russia that is possible elevation war and the extinction and independently to AC drop they would fracture NATO that causes a great power war. This doubts it's running that Eastern Army natural purposes of the natural for now. NATO supports from multiplier against power NATO. We see the worst case scenario against another European conflict with the pressure. There's no security. Conditionality is good. We get what we did, and if that's arbitrary, the practice of conditionality is good. We also get conditionality when almost all the 1AC was new, including the plan. One flexibility is key to two and our fallback options can issue control, which X has advice. And sandbagging, especially on this topic, can be as expensive and heterogeneous. And the ceiling allows after terrorism is logically proving kind of as bad as the plan is good. Logic is key to predictability, which terms with epidemic preparation, see research. 3, research testing at multiple angles, incentivizes our race with both sides, which improves our quality. Research skills, it makes us more reflexive, no impact to affect skills, but we turn it by forcing research and refinement. Skew is inevitable, but it's on to T-shells. D is a procedurals, and it's good. It forces 2 to make strategic decisions. Decisions, and we were skewed more, but then not skewed. It's closing the pre-round, and no offensive mission marginality afterwards and speaking last. It's not a voter, 0 resolutional basis, which makes it arbitrary, and causes us to crowd out. Worse to kick all the counterplans forcibly. Dispo doesn't solve our offense, arbitrary. These two observers also can always force permutations. The unique counterplan was done in 2 and C, but restrict. I'll read another card. This is 24. Trump promises all enforcing privatization Congress not the implementation without guarantee of price or remain until the last change of the presidential tariff cards. The bone card is marked at limit presidential tariff cards.
Okay, 542. Just like
Oh, the cards are
yeah, no, I was going to write the whole speech. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nope. Nope. I have 132.
Oh yeah, I started. I had the
Yeah,
time
yeah,
also.
You're trying to rob me.
You can call it 122.
Actually, yes, 2 seconds. Okay, the trade advantage, climate, icebreakers or whatever. Sorry, the growth DA. Or no, before growth, the state's counterplan, and then the growth DA.
Can I get that again?
Yes.
Sorry.
The trade advantage, climate advantage,
Yeah.
icebreakers disadd.
Uh-huh.
Whoa, my monitor is blocking out. Okay, states, growth disadd.
I still think on the dock.
Okay, I like just ended some.
Just
Oh wait, sorry. You have to do both SAI because otherwise only they sell for me.
Oh,
Okay. 128.
before icebreakers, the advantage counterplan.
The shine bright.
Nope.
This is a shine break.
Was that before? Yeah, that's
good.
right.
That's good.
Actually, doesn't matter.
Yes.
Okay, whatever.
Okay, everyone good? Multiple impacts dropped on the trade advantage. One supply chain disruptions cause aggressive and spilling nations go to war over shortages because they cascade across adjacent sectors. Our time frame is not long because it's the start of the trade deals solve the incentive to go to war, which means we don't have to win the ifs. The trade deals are catalyzed or absolutely result in different trade mechanisms or supply chains. Now, second is medical supply chain resilience is key to distribute the countermeasures and operate logistics to solve and contain infections, pandemics, or existential scientific consensus. And the avian flu, but spreading rapidly now, AI can also produce an engineered pathogen which our evidence is in soup and 6 inches. The evidence, they say we don't replace terrorists, which isn't solved. No, even if we don't replace Trump's terrorists, our evidence says that it replaces Trump's vision for terrorists because it implies that they're solution-oriented. No, this implying calculations or evidence includes Romans, which is calculations by EPA-based estimates of when emissions are associated with PEG to particular units and for generic activities. But if that is uncertain, estimates are impossible. Then we use firm level averages, which would be higher than higher than if they underreported their emissions. Yes, it is key to supply chains. COVID is the brink and the after so it doesn't matter if the supply chains are getting worse now. Yes, pharma, there's a global interest in access to crucial medical equipment, and populous leaders will not ban vaccines proven by COVID. It does not keep. My monitor's like glitching, so I'm gonna just unplug this and switch my phone to my computer. I thought I was like blinking involuntarily, and I was like, no.
I think 5 minutes.
Yeah, I have exactly 5 minutes.
Does that imply most of your blinks are voluntary?
That's a good point.
You don't let them distract you. You're the one of the
That's
speech.
insane, actually. Okay, 5 minutes. I'm on the case. Yes, key to AI. There's no evidence that says that there's rights now, or evidence that developers think that rights are not key, but trade turns them away, and global deglobalization turns them away from co-op. Yes, emerging AI is escalatory risk and unable to regulate. There's no race involved. There's no war in the 2 and Z. Warming. Concede no impact to decarbonization, and also that some decarbonization evidence would solve. And the status quo, BC is do solve. They do mitigate leakage. Their evidence does not assume the U.S. doing it. BC because it's the most important export markets of their opening incentive to decarbonize, and it's not worth the risk of lying about emissions. But if it's impossible, then they can just use firm level averages or estimates, which was above. Concede no manufacturing impact, which preserves no offense. Advantage counterplan. Not going for warming, so it's irrelevant, but do both, which means there's no offense about solely solving warming. Icebreakers just that.
Start on.
Okay. I'll put content first. It's about our 1. Choosy choice. The choosy never raise their best at counterplan answers because they can be picked or linked to the application contradictions to other pages to Class 3 for distance makes it impossible to answer challenges like picks with 10 extra planes and unique counterplans out of straight turns. Denied choice now. You should evaluate what they did in this round. The counterplan out of a straight turn, and they read 11 conditional options, and they could combine them across pages and take place, and 2 to the power of 11 is 2000. So it's the billing combinations. Now there this was also a choice you can take place that would improve the extras at the afternoon post cost on anything in the 1AC, which is reciprocal to the 1AC. They say next class says wrong. One states the econ and market things are overrated, and judges can vote for to narrow to your interest to research solves the next bullshit in death strategies instead of run and gun. And the generic run and guns 3 contractors or officers don't get to learn if their strategies were good. No logic. 1 is irrelevant. It would not justify intrinsicness and process advocacies and practice how nuclear war impacts. 2 logic is arbitrary. Unconda used to be the norm. Conda is an invented rule. No research. Just on multiple debates. Self-research is more in-depth. Use not inevitable. Counterplans are unique and asking me to straight terms. Just that's what our argument is. But it's not about time to. It's about strats. That they do not turn research advocacy because their evidence forces a lack of breadth is breadth over depth. No diminishing utility does not solve strats. 2 disciplines not arbitrary. It's predictable. Terms on afterwards for 2 straight turns. 2AC is last speech for offense because the rebuttal arguments are new. We specify terms or theory. It's not more arbitrary than conduct because unconduct used to be the standard. Don't just pick counterplans. That is conduct, so it doesn't solve our offense. That damage is already done. Just but it does solve negative good counterplans. Solve they can force the 2AC to perm, but also we can just perm mute the planks. The counterplan proper 1.
Read the thing
Oh, right. Not just by new apps and old advantage Mac was clear it's instantly recipe NDT. We already have read the chairs only affirmative. Now the advantage icebreaker stuff proper. The permutation to the counterplan. The plan is still economy wide even if it exempts Canada and Finland, which means they don't need to answer any of their definitions. The plan does apply to all of the economy. Their evidence just says it has to have significant impacts on the energy flows and not exempt a sector of the economy, which means that it doesn't apply. It means all their evidence. Now Canada and Finland are tiny, and they say Canada and Finland tiny. We're not going for the warming deficit, but the fact that Canada and Finland contribute an extremely small amount of emissions proves that tariffs would not harm them, which proves that the selling icebreakers is inevitable. Their evidence says that Trump is destroying the continental relationship with trade jingoism and massive distrust. Their unique evidence proves their relationship is resilient because of existential security and defense interests. I don't know why they keep reading the line in the 1 and it's not about icebreakers. It does not say that it will collapse. It says it will collapse the relationship in general. Now go back to permitted counterplan. Mass noun is wrong. You have to still impose fees if you find everyone but 2 countries, which proves that it means they're vague evidence that says that it just has to be general. They say now go back to the 2AC6, which is no Russia impact. Russia's forces are tied down. They spend 30,000 troops, and 80% of it is diverted to Ukraine. Not being justified, the army doesn't matter. The card they write about boats nuking each other does not say boats will nuke each other. It says that Russia will conquer Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Georgia, and Kazakhstan, which obviously requires a nuke. That also is necessary for the fracture NATO impact states.
And another question about Ukraine.
Yeah, another question about Ukraine. Super old. Don't know why they're still reading this impact. Okay, states. Do both solve the net benefit about preemption for the overcorrection for the federal government, but 2AC, what is it? But they also drop no spillover. They won't cooperate on other issues because there's interstate conflict. 2AC 5 is preemption. The because evidence is that governments will preempt. States attempt to override it, but they kind of win. Then the plan solves because it's certain, but it's delayed. They dropped on the other process kind of plan that the plan is not immediate. And they don't get any new arguments, but they also conceded theory on the other counterpoint in the 1 and R that the counterpoints that compete off immediacy and certainty are illegitimate. Okay, anything else? Do you want the definition now?
No.
Okay,
But I do want you to say uncertainty.
Right. Okay. The impact of preemption is uncertainty. That is key to investment because key to investment in manufacturing competitiveness because price signals are key to develop trade deals, and it also means that it is extremely uncertain for perception of international leaders abroad because of the whims of trade deals are placed at the whims of whether or not 50 different states approve of it. Tariffs. Does not outline time frame econ boom and bust cycles means that it takes time to trickle up. It does not turn industry. The internal link solves it because the counterpart establishes trade deals that make it resilient. The unique counterpart doesn't solve flip-flop is even worse. The sodium pill evidence says that Trump is idiosyncratic and obviously not constrained by Congress. The same day reversals. Stop predictability and stability. The damage is already done. This is 2AC3 evidence on the unique discount countries are not open to reversal. Their evidence about the perception is not about the perception of trade and growth, just about whether or not they want the tariffs to be good or not. They dropped 2AC7, which is a carded argument that the plan solves the trade war causes race to shop and credit, which corrects the perception that universal tariffs is self-inflicted on other countries specifically for competitiveness because it says that the plan creates solution-oriented deals towards climate and cooperation on other issues, which is obviously linked to their advantage.
Icebreakers DA. States Counterplan. Trade DA. Trade Advantage. Yeah, Canada DA. The States Counterplan. The Trade DA. And then the Trade Advantage. Okay, is everyone good?
No coherent deficit into 1AR means it's this game over unless they go for conditionality. 0 card says that Canada or Finland are key to the app that needs to pick souls. The entire case, they are tiny ass countries. They're both relatively green and liberal, so there's no reason they would be key to trade disputes. That it means that the pick is sufficient to solve their impacts. All the trade advantage are all broad and structural, which means just marginally improving trade globally should be sufficient to solve them. The shot code for the VR to have a shot in the spade is a card that either of these counterplans are key. Permutation due to the counterplan is severance. They've conceded that a fee is a bear noun, which means if they can't sever out of it, or they should have include the word the or a. They also conceded every interpretation of any community policy and 40 carbonization. You should understand those in this instance as requiring their border adjustment to apply to the whole global economy. That's the only thing that's coherent with a tariffs affirmative, and you should hear heavily negative because anything else makes it impossible for the negative to engage the app. That always for limited ground, all of which was impacted out in the 1AR, dropped by the 1AR, and even if they win, that they can subset, that should have to be specified in the 1AC plan text. Otherwise, it's impossible to be negative because the 2AC can always shift out of our best offense. That means that permutation due the counterplan is non-starter. They also didn't unpack what it means to why it's still economy wide, even if they get rid of countries, which was above. Now the DA impact, it is massive and outweighs they drop you only U.S. Russia war causes extinction. War in the Arctic goes nuclear. Impact if it's wrong. A, it would occur. Yes, more impact. Evidence about invasion, but the 1AC weather says there could be rapid escalation in the Arctic, which proves a range of possible pretexts. Russia could claim that it was forced to protect fishermen and maintain access to resources, which clearly doesn't require a ground invasion. B is the NATO impact drop, refusing to respond to Russia in the Arctic. Does Article 5, even if the Russian military is depleted through impact, even assumes Russia would have to fight NATO if icebreakers don't go through, then that wouldn't happen. And there would be no army to oppose even limited forces. That's down. C is miscalculated. Arctic, the Arswell evidence says Russia would begin nuclear tests, which causes nuclear arms race, false signals of launch. It says greatest attacks prompt the U.S. of reaction, all of which outweighs since they dropped that only U.S.-Russia war causes extinction. Icebreakers are not inevitable. This is just a repeated Dartmouth assertion. The 1NC evidence is phenomenal. It says icebreakers is on the table, and then quote asked what impact tariffs might have on the icebreaker deal. Canada officials made it clear that measures harm virtually every facet of the relationship between those volatile integrated supply chains. I'm so sick of reading this line to you. It should be obvious that they clearly trade off with icebreakers and no aftercard substantiates that they would still sell them. Impact defense is wrong, all of which was answered above. Now, conditionality. Dartmouth has
Relations thumped, isn't that?
Oh, relations thumped is wrong, or the uniqueness, we'll extend the uniqueness counterplan to revoke Trump tariffs, which solves it. They didn't indict any of the 1AR cards. It says that's sufficient to provide relationship.
It says relations on the brink.
Our evidence also says relations are on the brink, which is a frame dropped by the 1AR. Conditionality. Dartmouth has no way out in this debate. They have dropped conditionality. It's non-resolutional, clearly flagged to the 1AR. It's even in the doc, and that was their argument about why it's not tied to resolution means you cannot vote on it. Doing so would be arbitrary, which turns everything else. Predictability is the basis of both AF and corporations. So it outweighs any normative arguments that 2AR makes about why their model would produce better debates. Those debates don't happen because no one can predict them in advance that they will or will not get conditionality, which means that neg teams still commit acts of terror in very shallow ways, and AF teams aren't able to check it. Now, I'm extending logic. Proving the counterplan is bad does not prove the plan is good, which makes it illogical. The AF is the burden of proof. The negative burden is to rejoin the plan. The proof that they voted for the plan. The negative can either present direct cost or opportunity cost. Proving the plan is better than a single opportunity cost does not prove the plan is a good idea or the resolution is true. 1AR answers don't get it done. Asserting it is relevant is wrong. Logic is the basis of AF and neg prep because it's what makes things most predictable, which is above. Condo is invented is a neg argument. It proves that there's no resolutional basis, so rejecting the team should not cut it. Logic outweighs internally consistent and not arbitrary understanding the burdens of each team is key to predictable prep on both sides. Comes prior to internal desirability. Anything else falls into arbitrary, ad hoc, and actual resolutional theory. It turns AF fairness and research because arbitrary determinants of who win means neither side can compare research or strategize. We don't have to win negative flex, but I'll extend it to logic comes prior. And we're so far ahead of it. This is round 7 of the NDT going for conditionality should be an RVI for cowardice. They basically broke new. You can't know in the pre-round what they were changing of the plan or advantages. So even if the app is similar to the old one, we did not know that. Dropped that skews us way more than it skews them. You should care about that. The topic is massive. NBI is heterogeneous, and the ceiling gives the app infinite leeway via terrorism, which was dropped by the 1AR. They also get to speak first and last and have a massive structural advantage given 1AR sandbagging. The econ DA is tanked uniqueness wise, which were their arguments on literally every other page. We also don't get counterplanes that compete off of things like immediacy or certainty, which means there are very limited tools in the negative toolkit gets checked back. The command and control critique gets rejected by judges on framework, so it's not a stable basis for preparation, and their app skirts it because it's unique enough margins. All of that is especially true at the NDT. They had 2 months to produce a string of good for ones that dodged class, usually are heavily negative. Negflex, always afflex, the modern debate plain text are super vague and unspecified, proven by this debate when they did not specify that they omit countries in the plain text and then tried to claim that in the TC. The topic is app bias, interpretation, interest uniqueness overwhelms every DA unless the app is silly and reads a larger mechanism than they need to. It means we turn fairness, but the app can still stay in the game. They had 2 months. They can straight turn things or read a bunch of add-ons and then class down the 1AR. The app always has a way out. Impact is fairness, which outweighs its only impact. The last room in the ceiling. There are no more cards to cut. The only question is whether the flip besides the national debate tournament. Netflix turns research breadth is depth, cutting a bunch of unique strategies versus carbon tax is better than the same econ DA since Northwestern round 1 and learning more about a wider range of issues better for topic education. Plus, with link turn at the biggest turn link is forcing apps to get deep in the weeds to defend all objections, which solves that depth downstream, narrowing the block solve because every too easy answer requires 3 to 5 responses. Otherwise, 1AR sandbagging and leeway. Plus, the last speech means the deck always loses. Yes, diminishing marginal utility. The 1AR just asserted there is none but didn't have a warrant. It means that if the app is intelligently designed with the Fed key warrant, MBI key warrant, clean energy policy, and 40 card warrant, then they're probably going to be fine. If not, they deserve to lose. And the next has done its job of testing, reading 4 process counterplans that compete on the same words. RBI disfunctionality doesn't solve. It's incoherent, which means it doesn't solve logic because the counterplans are opportunity cost. Doesn't solve deck flex because it lets the affirmative choose the entire direction of the debate, which is vastly distortionary at the NDT. It also is super incoherent because what happens if the TAC straight turns 4 counterplanes is the neg just fucked. No one understands how to resolve that debate. Now, anything else? Okay. Trade advantage. The plan does not solve it. This is absolutely incoherent. It does not repeal Trump tariffs. They don't have a single 1EC card that just stacking a new tariff on top of it would be sufficient to revive the relationship. There's also their internal links are tiny and solved by the pick. They do not have a reason that Canada or Finland are critical to things like supply chains or vaccines, all of which means they can't keep a triad on 2ER because the counterplan is so massive and the 1ER just like straight up didn't have a real deficit.
Okay, 128. Because I'm immediately late.
Yeah.
Okay, trade advantage, Russia DA. Okay, are we good? The plan solves existential collapse of trade, which is key to facilitate policy-oriented trade deals around medical supply chains and artificial intelligence and supply chain resiliency. This answers the Cotton Barrett only nuclear war existential card because the Cotton Barrett evidence is comparing different nuclear wars are evidences that AI and pandemics are existential risk even if they themselves do not cause nuclear wars. So our impact is existential and it ties the consensus of both pandemic scientists and artificial intelligence analysts. Now, the incoherency argument, the Herald evidence in the 1EC is extremely highlighted and very good. It says the plan does solve the long-term, not the sort of collapse of trade or deglobalization, but rather it creates a new mission for trade and new domestic political constituencies around that mission, which says that we should orient trade deals around solving discrete political problems problems, i.e. climate change, which then spills over by reconstituting the domestic debate by which to not just be between multinationals and labor unions, but instead get people involved who care about substantive policy issues like supply chains, like AI, like medical supply chains, etc., which then means that we do sort of solve a long-term shift toward targeted trade deals that solve those problems. The Harrell evidence is really good, and it's particularly specific. It is about the Trump administration says that this is true no matter who wins the White House, and they do not have any evidence substantiating their claim. Our evidence does not have to repeal the current Trump tariffs, rather it has to reorient the political economy of trade in the United States, which they have dropped in every speech that we functionally do. It might be solved by the pick, but we will win competition on the pick, which means that if you judge trick the pick, then that clearly outweighs their DA, which we have some risk of defense to. Russia dissent was going to go for conditionality, but the 2NR fucked up the counter competition debate pretty badly. Now, the debate that the accord that they are hinging this debate on is says that the following in its entirety. Generics are species of monadic kind, predication. Generics do not express quantification. Rather, they ascribe a property to a kind. On such analyses, the noun phrase is to be taken as a name that denotes a kind. If you can explain to me what that means, you should teach English, not judge debate. This is totally incoherent. The lawyer went back to this argument after going from perm to the counterplan to the sort of substance and said that the mass noun thing is wrong because it is obviously true that if you impose a fine on everyone except for one person, you still impose fees, which is what the language in the 1AC says. It says, it in fact does not say should impose a fee. It says should impose fees. If the plan imposes a fee on China and Russia, it has imposed import fees. This is the most logical reading of the plan, and the alternative reading of the plan means that they get infinite picks out of individual companies, which are impossible to debate. This is brief in the 1AR, but the 1AR that clearly says that they do not have a theoretical explanation for why their interpretation of the plan is preferable. You know this because they just tacked on an exemption to the end of the plan, but they do not actually have a definition that says the plan must apply to all countries. Now, their definitions are incoherent. Their MBI's argument of the plan is economy-wide because it affects all trade flows. It affects because of the nature of the fact that the plan and the permutation affect all of they do affect global trade. They affect every company that trades with every other country, which is every company because the economy is interdependent. They drop that we need these interpretations. Market-based instruments are economy-wide. The plan. This court just says that they have economy-wide scope. That is true of the plan. There's no interpretation that says it should be about the global economy, rather about the U.S. economy. The plan does affect the entire U.S. economy, which is all the 1AC evidence about decarbonization. But the global economy stuff is new and true and incoherent because the resolution says in the U.S. and the United States and market-based instruments in the United States. Now, the plan still, the counterplan still does affect the entire global economy by adopting a policy that affects all countries by tariffing them, and then it affects Canada and whatever the other one was. I still don't remember by not imposing a tariff on them, which means the permutation meets their interpretation. The clean energy policy argument just says that it needs to play out across several subsystems like electricity, transport, and housing. The permutation obviously does that. It does not say that it has to affect literally every company in the economy, and this is not a coherent reading of the plan text. Decarbonization requires economy-wide application was also answered above. It says all aspects of the economy must change. A tariff on all imported goods except for from Canada would affect the entirety of the economy, which was dropped in the 1AR. They do not have a theoretical interpretation for why this counterplan is good, and we have some arguments for why it is not good. The 2NR did not say judge kicks if we win competition. This is decisive. They did not ever say the squo is a logical option, but the counterplan is a logical when the plan can be done, which means that there is no link to their interpretation. It does not become impossible to negate the AF. It becomes impossible, in fact, to answer counterplans if their fees argument is correct and the negative can pick out of one individual company. That is clearly worse, but the plan is still sort of economy-wide or broad in its scope, which means that it still is possible to beat. Now, the impact debating is outweighed by our existential impact. They dropped Russian defense. The armed forces are too heavily tied down. They are in, quote, no position open a second front. Troops are destroyed. They lost 80% of their troops, and our evidence says the troops would have otherwise been never to Finland. At worst, the impact is super slow. Our evidence says that it would take years to recover and is, quote, no position to launch, quote, any type of military offensive. It answers both impacts means that Russia would have no incentive to launch an offensive in Finland, and Canada will not take advantage of NATO cohesion because that requires a continental land war. Now, finally, there is a double bind. The tariffs are imposed in the status quo. None of their evidence is post-Liberation Day. It does not assume that we've actually imposed the tariffs on Canada. Their uniqueness evidence is from like February and says that if Trump imposed tariffs, that would strain the relationship. That means that is inevitable. That means that imposition of tariffs is inevitable or has already happened, which means that should have already strained the relationship. They do not have a card for if we get rid of the tariffs that would restore the relationship with Canada. And none of their uniqueness evidence shows that tariffs have already been imposed. The 1AC evidence and the 2AC evidence that I read on the trade decide uniqueness counterplan says that the damage has already been done. It has already sort of sent shockwaves throughout the U.S. relationships and the economy, and they do not have a card substantiating their argument that it restores the allied relationship with Canada. But if it is true that And they also dropped that flip-flopping is worse from the 2EC and the 1AR on the uniqueness counterplan, which says that flip-flopping creates more market inconsistency and makes our trade allies more pissed because the counterplan looks like we are imposing and then unimposing and then reimposing tariffs, which means that they do not see Trump as a reliable trade partner, which means that the counterplan cannot solve. There's a terminal uniqueness problem. The plan and the counterplan apply economy-wide because they apply to the entirety of the economy. The plan still has a massive impact on the economy. None of their evidence has intent to define or delineate, so the counterplan does not compete, and the case clearly outweighs a mitigated TA. Good debate.
The neg card doc will be on in a couple seconds. Okay, neg doc is signed.
I'm in.
I'll end.
Whoa. Good start. I'll clean it up later.
I was the last one in, so I'll announce. Congratulations on a fantastic debate. It was a 2-1 decision for the negative.
I sat. I didn't think the counterclaim was competitive, so I kicked it so the case outweighed the DA. I think the 2NR spent too much time on conditionality. Felt like an overkill to me, and some of these arguments, I just didn't think that, especially on the perm, didn't think that you really developed enough, and I think there was enough room for the 2AR to kind of tell the story about how the counterclaim is not competitive. So I think that narrative was a little bit more persuasive to me. So in the competition debate, I thought that the competition arguments were not really well developed from the start. I think, all of your arguments, I think, hinge upon stuff like, grammar and like the parts about economy wide, which is a little bit tricky in this context. So I didn't think that there was like a good, well-grounded literature-based arguments for why this should be competitive. So the grammar mass noun thing, so I really couldn't string together what this argument meant for the negative. So personally, English is my second language. I felt like grammar was never my strong suit, but reading your evidence also didn't really help because I didn't know, when Holland started reading the line, I'm like, I don't know what this is. So I think that you needed to spend a lot more time working through, all of those things to me for me to say that grammatically apt is, permutation of the incorrect reading. So I didn't really think that I could vote on that since I couldn't explain it. I think the arguments about subset, I can think of why, normatively, I can think of some reasons why import fees would have to apply to all countries based on the plan, but I think that was also really difficult because, again, I think all of your evidence is in the context of defining, CP, MBI, those things in the context of sectors of the economy domestically. So it's talking about, transportation sector, housing sector, like it's talking about applying that in the context of the domestic economy, not that it would have to cover emissions all around the globe. And I think that the plan applies fees on the consumption of goods which contain emissions abroad. So it does not really matter if that emission comes from one country or the other. Since consumption happens throughout the US economy, I think they meant your burden of economy-wide. I think for this to be viable, I think you needed some reasons why excluding Canada or Finland would make the plan not cover economy-wide. So if there are like certain goods that we only import from Canada and Finland, that would make the term functionally not economy-wide. I think that would suggest that plan does not meet, but I think even that, I think is still reaching for the stars because, given the interconnected nature of the global economy, I don't know why excluding those two countries would mean that consumption wouldn't cover all parts of the domestic economy. And I think separately, there were some normative arguments as to why subset in this context would have to cover every country, but again, I don't think that the twin are really debated that well. So I think things that you could have said is like, their interpretation would mean that fees on China is topical, fees on Russia is topical, like all of these subset. I think you could have debated that a bit more, but I don't think that is a version of the twin that you gave, so I really can't say that one subset should not be the F. So after that, the counterplan is gone. I think DA has some mitigation. I think you're totally correct on the actual mechanics of the DA. I think the link is good and impact seems reasonable, but it's not 100%. I think they have some arguments on that. So I think given that the case was really big, they also access extinction impact. I think that the case just outweighed.
I can go. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I took a while to decide. But I ended up deciding that I actually think the perm due the counterplan is severance. So the definition of economy-wide tests the generalization to economy-wide definitions for tariff asks seems like a reasonable explanation to be all countries. I am tempted by the affirmative reading of the evidence that their argument is related to energy flows, specific sectors. I think the explanation that was given about consumption was something that I considered, but I think there's two arguments in the 2NR that hedge back against this for me. First is that the negative makes an argument that even if subsets were somehow justifiable because of this type of consumption argument, it would need to be included in the plan text from the 1AC. Otherwise, that allows for infinite 2AC re-specifications, which are problems for grounds and limits, because the app can always shift out at the negatives best offense. I think that that's a pretty persuasive argument, and a reason why it is worse to have subsets on the affirmative than it is on the negative. Two, even if it's true that it is just energy flows and that there's different sectors that are being affected, there's different arguments in the 2AR about like, okay, not even imposing a tariff is also an impact on the economy, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's reasonable to think that the Finnish and Canadian markets being left unaffected is an exclusion from the entire global economy or all energy flows, which is listed in the negatives evidence. I also wasn't quite sure about the grammar arguments as much. I couldn't explain the ascription of unique kind thing, so I kind of just went to your explanation of it, why the importance of the generalization is key, even though I can't understand the grammar warrant. I think that's just kind of the harm of reading something that's so hyper specific. But I at least went for the explanation that was given of it, even though I couldn't explain it as much. I also, just in a related way that I said above, I think that subsets on the app are worse than subsets on the negative. The limits argument cuts both ways. So the arguments that are given in the 2AR about being able to pick out of specific companies and sectors, I just think that's exponentially worse when the app does it. When plan texts are vague, unspecified, whatever it might be. So once I decide that I think that from due the counterplan isn't competitive, I think that the pig solves the majority of the case. I can go into the dissat stuff if you want. I think that uniqueness was I thought it was the least decisive in favor of the negative, but I still end up leaning kind of in the negative direction. I think there's certainly a risk of a big link. I think that there's an impact, but it's kind of mitigated. But I still think that the RTIC and native cohesion stuff can lead to something, but I can explain that in more detail if you
So I largely agree. I think just in particular the reason I think the counterplan competes is the 2NR's explicit phrasing of even if you win, that the app could be subsets, the failure to specify in the plan, insert re-clarification is bad, sandbagging, etc. And so I don't think the app gets to be a subset thing in this case. I think the counterplan competes. From there, it's I think the counterplan solves the case. The deficit isn't huge and not impacted really in the 1AR. And then from there, I just need to think if there's any risk of it. Not any risk, but the DA is more than low. There's a moderate risk of it no matter what. I think that outweighs what at best is a relatively small deficit.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Where would you? Well, okay. Could we have given 2AR about conditionality, like a uphill battle for time coverage reasons? But were there any red flags? Was anyone going to care about this non-resolutional arbitrary thing? Okay. Okay. And then I think in terms of 1AR strategic planning, I was kind of just this block is just a bunch of shit because they're trying to throw you off. So here's where you just be as militant as possible. Where would you get time back from the 1AR to explain some of these competition arguments more in depth? Because I also
so I actually think you can even afford to do less substance on the actual icebreakers DA, because I think once the counterplan goes away, it's you correctly identified that I don't think the 2NC case defense is particularly great to the trade advantage. So I think you have a pretty good case for try or die no matter what, and so you can allocate some of the substantive time spent on the DA to the competition. Also less time on conditionality would also give you more time there.
I was going to say, I think maybe a little bit less time on conditionality. I also think this 1AR just had some pauses that just made it so it lost some time, that maybe ended up to 15 seconds just figuring out where to go and flipping back and forth. And so I think maybe with that extra time, you could have been a little bit more explanation on the competition.
The question that I have is, so I feel like Tweety didn't really answer the DA icebreaker. Is that the reason why you thought that conditionality had to be a thing, or
mostly that was
the reason why
conditionality was mostly die by the sword because the 1NC was so silly.
Mm-hmm.
But you are correct in your assessment of the DA also.
Okay.
Well, I said the things that I wanted to say, but maybe not in as much detail.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a 2AR on impact defense plus we already did the tariffs plus Trump is going to blow up the Canada relationship. And if none of that is true, then they will sell them inevitably, even if we have carbon tariffs. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought that that set of arguments, if I didn't have specific evidence on the icebreakers thing, I think that set of arguments seemed reasonable to me.
Okay.
So I maybe just gut conditionality altogether, perhaps.
Okay.
This debate, because I'm another thing I'm thinking is if let's say 2NR does not spend as much time on conditionality, I think that they were ahead on a lot of theory questions. I can also think of they can just pick a counterplan, go for the DA case, and answer conditionality. I think that also puts you in a bad position too. So I don't know, strategy-wise, it's a little bit tough. So maybe just I don't know. To me, I think getting rid of condo in the 1AR and just going for the substantive arguments, I think a better strategy in this context. And then the other thing I was going to say on the trade arguments, it seemed maybe you could simplify the explanation in the 1AR a little bit more, because there is a lot of overlap between the trade DA, trade advantage. For example, you explained the political constituency thing twice, I think. So if there's a way to make that a little bit more streamlined, I think that also could help.
For the spec in the plan argument, I don't think this was in the 2AR, but what would be the reason if the plan does meet the definitions, does meet MBI and the grammar, whatever, what would be the way that it would need to specify the...
So I thought about this and I was that actually in and of itself is to me what seems to be the correct argument, which is if we win the initial premise that, you know, the app can be subsets because all the words in the plan were, then we did originally specify. So we meet this standard of like the 2AC was not a reclarification, it was just we're all along or whatever. And but just like saying that would have zero this for me.
I guess.
Okay, so it was more like you did think the plan and the abstract met the definitions, but just this technical
Yeah.
spec thing. Okay, got it.
So would that have gotten you if the one AR, 2 AR said that? Like, assuming none of the rest of it would be changed, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That makes
I
sense.
honestly didn't get the specification thing, maybe it's a flow issue, but I don't think that was like a big highlight of the trial on perm. So I just felt like they met all of the other substantive debating on perm and being met, and yeah.
I thought the debating was pretty close on the permutation, and so having that argument as just like a dropped argument, I think is almost just like a tiebreaker.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good debate, Georgetown. Thanks,
Appreciate
afternoon.
it.